My name is Jake Query, Jimmy Cook, Eddie Garrison, the other members of the company here on Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. And we kind of joke about our fictional boardroom, but we actually have a guy that works in a boardroom, essentially, for an NBA franchise joining us in studio in his 7th season now as the general manager of the Indiana Pacers, and he is Chad Buchanan. Chad, I have no idea why I'm wearing headsets. That's out of habit. You're sitting right here next to me. But first off, welcome to the studio, man. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be here. I've never been over here before.
It's very exciting, isn't it?
It's
is. Not as exciting as your job, obviously, which is underway because you guys had your first practice yesterday. Now, I assume, can you kind of take me through what that entails? I assume it's probably more just like everybody wearing name tags and refamiliarizing yourself and maybe a slight walkthrough, or was it right out of the box?
You know, most of our guys have been in town for the whole month of September, working out together. It's voluntary workouts, but our gym has felt like the season had started about, the beginning of September, I would say. Yesterday, you got the jerseys on. There's more people in the building watching, and there's a little more of a competitive juice in the building, I would say, because now it's like, okay, first game is in a week. Guys are playing for minutes, guys are playing for role, guys are trying to, play for contracts. That's really, you felt the intensity level start up yesterday with the competitiveness.
So we'll get to the elephant in the room right out of the box, right? The contracts, Buddy Hield I really like Buddy Hield. I don't pretend to be in the locker room. I don't know that aspect of it, but I think he brings something to the table on the floor that is indisputable in his shooting. But my outside observation, Chad, and I want your opinion on this, is that you never know when you acquire a player how that guy's going to fit in. And it seems to me like with this roster, he has fit in perfectly in terms of being a guy that just kind of keeps everything. He's like Danny Rosa in Ted Lasso. Like, he kind of keeps everybody loose and has that role. And as a result of that, his importance is even more magnified. But that puts you at a crossroads because he merits being extended. But there are other guys coming that are younger and underneath him. Where do things stand with him?
I mean, there's so many positive things that Buddy brings to the table. You touched on several of them. I think one of the things that you didn't touch on is Buddy's durability and love of the game, love of being in the gym, love of practicing. Everything about being an NBA player, Buddy just can't get enough of. And it sets a great example for our younger players when they see, here's a guy who's been in the league for a long time, and he's in there every afternoon shooting hundreds and hundreds of threes by himself. Doesn't want a rebounder. We say it all the time. He's addicted to basketball. He's addicted to shooting specifically. And so there's so many good traits that he brings to our team. Like you hit on the head, he fit in perfectly right away. Coach Carlisle, his system, what he values in shooting. Obviously, he's one of the greatest that we've seen this last decade. Then you got to factor in the business of our league and us trying to look long term and building a team that can be sustainably competitive and hopefully get to the point where we're an elite team in this league. We've got to factor all that in. And in working with Buddy's agent, we've talked through that of how the short term for Buddy and the long term for the Pacers, there's got to be a middle ground on that. And we're continuing to talk. I don't know what'll come of it, but we want Buddy on the team. We want him here. If we can find, the right, situation for both sides, whether his role, his minutes, position, all that fits, and, financially for us it fits, we hope he's here a long time.
Yeah, is it fair to say, because my thought on it, Chad, would be, I think Buddy Hield, so he is entering into his final year, right?
Correct.
So if you were to offer him a contract extension, it would be beyond this season. And I think there is still a critical role on the court probably for him for, let's say, 3 years. But if you're extending him for a 5-year deal, would you try to front load that money? How does it work from a salary cap standpoint? Because I guess what I'm getting at is it seems to me, and I want your opinion on this, that Buddy Hield's role in, say, year 1 or 2 of an extended contract would be as a 3rd or 4th most important player for you. But with other players, Benedict Mathurin, Walker, who you drafted, some of the young guys that are on the roster, Andrew Nembhard, he then comes down to like maybe a 6, 7, 8 later in the years there and probably should be paid as such. So how do you navigate through that?
Yeah, we're in a unique situation. We still have cap room right now, which we're, amongst the league, we have the most cap room left, ironically, of anybody out there. So we have the ability to do, some creative ways of extending Buddy. And those are ideas that we've talked about with his agent. And I think you're correct. As Buddy gets older, and he's not old right now, but he's older relative to our team.
Right.
But I think his game should age pretty well. He doesn't rely on athleticism and size and speed and quickness. I mean, he has an elite skill that should age well. But I do think some of the young guys in our system, we want to continue to evolve and grow them. And where Buddy fits into that probably evolves as well if he's with us long term.
Have you actively made phone calls, including him?
No, we're not trying to trade him. You know, if teams call us on him, then obviously it's our job to listen if we feel that makes the team better. But we're not actively trying to trade Buddy. There's teams that have called, but nothing of serious interest.
Chad Buchanan is our guest. Nice to take some time with us. In today's NBA, what's harder to find in season in terms of transactions? Good defense or good shooting?
That's a good question. Probably the defensive part is tough to find because I think that the average coach is going to get attached to somebody that they feel can help stop some of the elite scorers in our league. And so you'll find sometimes the one-dimensional players, not that Buddy's one-dimensional, but the shooting component, sometimes there are guys that are sitting on the end of a bench. You see there's examples of that all over the league. There are guys that are elite shooters, but they don't bring a lot else to the table, so they're stuck. As the season evolves and teams are trying to win games and the defensive side of the ball becomes way, way more important, it's harder to pry away somebody like that. Prying away a two-way player, a young two-way player, is darn near impossible in our league right now. So, but that is definitely a side of the ball where we want to see growth from this year.
You know, we were talking earlier, Chad, about, I'm sure your favorite topic, you know, fantasy sports, which makes everybody an expert, right? But in fantasy football, I think, and I'm saying this to put it in the terms that listeners can identify with, right? I think a lot of people, when they build their fantasy football team, they feel really good about their team. And then they look at it and they go, oh, gosh, I actually have 7 wide receivers and only 3 running backs. And I need, and, you know, whatever. And you realize that you're too heavy in one area, too light in another. With your roster, the area that you right now feel the Indiana Pacers are the richest is where? And the area where, truth be told, you still need some depth is where?
I think we are richest at the point guard position. I think we have 3 true point guards in Tyrese, Drew, and TJ that are, you know, it's hard to find a combination of 3 guys with that talent, that character. I think the other position, the center position, we have some depth as well. And going back to the point guard spot, Bruce Brown can play some point guard as well. I think we have 4 really, really good players, 1 all-star, obviously, at that position. And then, you know, the middle part of our roster, you know, the 2, 3, 4, especially as you swing more to the 3 and the 4, is where we have a lot more unknowns. We have some young players there that are trying to prove themselves. You know, we have some guys that played for us last year, and Aaron Neesmith, Benedict, you know, even Jordan at the end of the year that had some good moments for us, but they're still young players. Right. And we don't know where those guys' careers are going to go, and they're still in a development mode. And, you know, I think our coaches are trying to see what we can get out of those guys. So, and unfortunately, those are the most important positions in today's NBA, is, you know, the wing position. The elite players in our league, the majority of those guys are the, you know, the 6'7", 6'8", dominant ball handling, playmaking players. And that's where, you know, we got to see, do we have one of those guys on our roster that, number one, can defend those players, number 2, can be that type of player for us offensively as well. So that's where, you know, talk about the fantasy roster, where we are unknown right now.
Who's your most versatile player?
I think probably I would say Bruce Brown. I think in watching him over the last, obviously seeing him in the league and seeing him play different positions and seeing him in our building with our team, even the last 2 days of practice, just his ability to do a lot of different things on both ends of the ball. Now, he doesn't have tremendous size. He's not your 6'7", 6'8" wing, but he's got toughness. He's got smarts. He's got instincts, making plays with the ball. He can shoot the ball. He can pass the ball. There's a lot of things he can do that I can see our coaches morphing him from multiple different positions, offensively and defensively.
The thing about, I mentioned this earlier, Chad Buchanan, who's the general manager of the Pacers, joins us here in studio. The NBA fascinates me for a lot of reasons, but one of them is, and I've said this a lot, you go to a game, you're watching, some guy checks in, you're like, man, I remember this guy's name. You look it up, oh, yeah, he was a one and done at Kentucky 4 years ago, whatever. 90%, I'm throwing out a number, 90% of players in the NBA are literally the greatest player in the history of their elementary school, middle school, high school, and for many of them, probably college. They've averaged 28 a game everywhere they've been. And now all of a sudden they're asked to be a wing defender and not much more, or a spot shooter, whatever it might be. How do you know when you're building a roster how a guy is going to accept and mold to that transformation? Aaron Nesmith's a guy that I'm thinking of when I say this, because he was a scorer. And then he gets to the league now, and scoring is like the fourth biggest responsibility he has when he's on the floor. How do you know that guys are going to buy into that?
It's an awesome question. I think my first instinct when you ask that question is, number one, do they love basketball? If you love basketball, that means you just, whether you are paid what our guys get paid or paid nothing to play it, you want to do it. You thirst it every day. And then the guys that really deep down want to win. Because if you want to win, you're going to do whatever it takes. And when you're in high school and college and junior high, like you mentioned, that meant I'm going to try and score 40 tonight instead of my 25. Well, no, now you're in the NBA. What that means for you is you're going to take 6 shots a game instead of 16 that you had of your last stop. But that's going to help us win. If you're really driven to win, you're going to do whatever it takes. And whatever role it takes, whatever the coach asks you to do, whatever your teammates need you to do, you're going to do it. And so finding guys with that character trait, the love of the game and the desire to win, those are the guys that tend to accept a role. And you can always we use this all the time. When you're part of a winning team in the NBA, those are the guys who get rewarded. I mean, Bruce Brown is the perfect example. And Bruce, mentioned it to his teammates the other night. When you win and you're part of a winning team, a championship team, you're going to get rewarded for it. And we rewarded Bruce for what he did and who we feel he can be for us. And I think players around the league, they see that. They see, hey, I don't need to average 30 points a game to get rewarded for it or recognized for it. And finding those guys that are just all about winning, those are the guys that, will accept a role. Because if you're all about yourself and you're all about your stats, and the first thing you do when you get in the locker room is where's the box score, those aren't the guys you're going to win with. They're going to put up numbers and they're going to be, some nights they're going to be fun to watch, but you're not going to win with those guys.
I'm not going to ask you to say any names, but are there players on this roster that still is a process that you haven't determined yet about them?
I don't think so. I think, this year will be a great determinant of that. We have 8 of our players are either in a contract year or an option year or something, along those lines. So that's half your roster. Last year we had a very happy team that was, not playing for anything personally. It was all about the team and growth, and that'll be a new dynamic for us this year. But I do think it'll test guys. Are you in it for the good of the team, or is this about your future? And because that naturally is going to happen. That happens. It's human nature. But can you put that to the side and focus in on being the best at the role that we're asking you to be in? And if you are, and the team thrives, you'll get rewarded. And so that this year will be a great test for a lot of our players.
Pacers general manager Chad Buchanan is our guest. You mentioned rewarding Bruce Brown. You give him 2 years, $45 million, and it's one of the first stories that break on the day of NBA free agency when it opened up on NBA TV and on ESPN and ESPN.com. When did the scouts start on Bruce Brown and the idea that he could legitimately be a piece that you could add, and why were you so aggressive in terms of what he can do for the team when you went out and got him?
I think watching Bruce back in Brooklyn, when he was in Brooklyn, he had a great playoff series against Milwaukee where he was playing almost the 4 spot. And I think that really our scouting staff, Ryan Carr, Vance Catlin, all of our scouts, really kind of saw a different side to Bruce, where you saw a versatility to mold into something that maybe you didn't think he could become. And so as we went through and we watched him, he ends up in Denver, watch him be a big part of that team coming off the bench, obviously a huge piece to them winning a championship. I think that's when and you look at your needs, what Bruce does, he brings a lot of versatility, he brings a lot of defense, he brings a lot of grit and toughness. And we had a team that was very offensive minded, that struggled to defend, and he was a natural fit to what the team was lacking. And so when we, got into free agency, he was the number one target for us, for the basketball reasons. Age-wise, he fits the timeline of, a lot of our guys. And, he was looking for, a new opportunity, I think. And so we were a great match for him.
Is the team option for cap flexibility? Or why the team option, I guess, in terms of that contract?
Yeah, I think, what we paid Bruce was probably above what the market was offering him. But we also wanted to, I think it was we have a great relationship with his agency. They said, hey, you maybe overpay him a little bit this year. Here, we'll give you an option the second year, and it's kind of a win-win for everybody. and it allows us to see how he fits this year. And, I think Bruce is, excited to be here, and it's a great situation for him financially and basketball-wise.
We talk a lot on this program, Chad. Chad Buchanan's our guest, the general manager of the Pacers, his 7th year in that role. We have, when you talk sports, half of our job is prognosticating, right? So to make it easier on ourselves and not put pressure on us, we created this fictional genie, Robin the Genie, right? So Robin the Genie can look into the future and can predict the future for people. If you were to meet Robin the Genie in our ridiculous hypothetical, and he had the ability to have one player on your roster reach his absolute maximum that you want out of him for this season, which player would that be that would most benefit where you want to go, and is the guy that is the most critical that he have a great year for you?
Several guys come to mind. I think one of the guys that first comes to mind for the future of this team to really blossom and hit, I would say the first name I think of is Benedict, because I think he number one, he's so young, he's so driven. So I think those two things create the recipe for somebody to really blossom. But I think positionally is a need for us as well. We need a guy on the wing who has some size and athleticism, who can maybe play both sides of the ball at a high level. And I think we saw some glimpses of him offensively last year doing that. It wasn't, start to finish. He went through, what like all rookies do, some ups and downs. If he can grow as a defender and continue to feel how Rick wants to play, how his teammates like to play, if that can hit, I think his upside is immense. And if that were to happen, I think that could take our team to a whole nother level. And it may not happen this year. It may be 2 years from now, maybe 4 years from now. It may never happen. But he is probably the first guy, when you ask that question, that it comes to mind for me.
Is it a matter of him executing what it is, or is it a matter of him legitimately learning what is necessary? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it's not the learning part. He studies the game. Our coaches work with him a lot. I think sometimes it's, he's a very confident kid, and sometimes that confidence is great for him. Sometimes it gets in his way a little bit, and trusting his teammates, I think, is something that he's got to continue to evolve with, because he's very believes in himself, and that's got to mesh with your teammates. And I think he's learning how to do that. That's the learning part of it, is more kind of the fit than it is like the actual plays on the court and things like that. So, but I do think that he has an immense desire to be great.
In the Pacers' history, Chad, and in the great teams that have been through this city, whether it be the Reggie era, whether it be the team, obviously, that unfortunately was kind of decimated by the brawl, but, that team with Artest and then, in Jermaine, or the Paul George teams, whatever it might be, all of those teams had a guy on the roster that was kind of a Steven Adams enforcer type, whether we're talking about Dale Davis or Jeff Foster or David West, a guy that kind of set a tone that everybody else knew, like if there's going to be a problem, you got to go through this guy. This unit seems to me to have been lacking that. And I don't know that it's as important in today's NBA, but I thought Daniel Tice could be that guy. And then, he didn't get a lot of reps, a lot of minutes last year. Is that still a necessary role, and can he be that guy if it is?
Last year we had James Johnson, I think, filled that role for us in a certain degree. He gave guys a little bit of a swagger, because James is a very tough-minded guy, and he was kind of like the big brother that you felt like you could go pick on anybody at the playground with if he was there with you.
There's an element to that that's valuable, right?
Yeah, and I do think that's important to a team to have that kind of belief and swagger. I think it's going to have to be a collective effort this year. I think Daniel can be part of it. I think Miles can be part of that. I think that's part of Miles has, been in the league for a good amount of time now, but I still think there's more growth to Miles. And I think that is one piece of his growth that could come. And I think Bruce Brown brings a lot of that as well. Andrew Nemhard does that in a very quiet way. And Aaron Nesmith is, he's a pit bull. Now, whether those guys are mature enough in their career, where they've been, where they've invoked fear in another team, that's got to take a little more time, I think. But that is something that we'll have to see. Can it be a collective effort this year rather than one individual player?
Which guy on your roster most likes to defend? everybody talks about, everybody, man, every level you play, there's those guys that like, no, I like playing defense. I like playing bull crap. You're saying that because the coach wants you to say that, right? Which guys truly like playing defense?
I think Miles does. I think Aaron Neesmith does. Those are the first two names. Andrew Nemhard is a terrific defender, and he's, last year proved he can guard a lot of different positions. But I'd say Miles and Aaron, those two guys both. Does that mean I have the wrong answer?
Miles Turner just chimed in. They told us this was going to happen at 2:30. Do we just wait this out? How long does this go? Do we know?
Just swipe it. Just swipe it. Swipe the alert.
Oh, there we
left.
go.
There you go.
I thought that was going through the radio. I didn't realize that was all over our phone. Sorry. Miles Turner clearly is like your rim protector, right? And you were talking about Andrew Nemhard is one that's interesting because Andrew Nemhard seems to me to be a guy that just goes out there and like you kind of don't know what he likes to do because he just does all of it, right? I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and when we drafted Andrew, watching him at Gonzaga, at Florida, we saw a very steady player and very steady growth. And when we watched him, leading up to the draft, he was always felt like he was the smartest guy on the floor. He just felt like he was never sweating anything. And he was just, the game came so easy to him. We thought this is a really solid third point guard type player for us. He gets in, to workouts and summer league and training camp, and we're like, he just doesn't make any mistakes. And he can guard anybody you put out there, from the backcourt position. He takes care of the ball. He's unflappable, and our coaches everybody in the gym is like, this kid needs to play, and he's been impossible to keep off the floor since. And credit to him, he's continued to work on his shooting this summer. Coach Jenny Busick worked with him a bunch on his shooting, and I think that if that comes along at a high level, look out, because I think he's got a really, really bright future.
Pacers General Manager Chad Buchanan joins us here on Query and Company. We've mentioned Aaron Neesmith a couple times, a guy that was struggling to kind of find his role, his identity with the Celtics, and he comes here and he's able to find a home and find that role. Kind of a two-part question. Are the Pacers built from a culture standpoint to be able to, reclamation project might be the wrong word, but to be able to have players that maybe don't work out in one place and thrive here? And then secondly, is that what you hope to get out of Obi Toppin?
Yeah, I think our coaches deserve all the credit for players that have come in here. Dating back to even Coach Nate McMillan, we've had guys that maybe were in a certain role with other teams that have come here and have thrived. And that's our coach, our coaches taking advantage of maybe something that they weren't allowed to do in their previous stop. Aaron's a guy, we talk about this a lot with our scouts. Aaron coming into the draft was a guy who was projected to more play like Buddy Hield than he's turned out to be. And Aaron was a guy who was running off a lot of screens, high volume shooter, scorer type at Vanderbilt, and he's evolved into, and it probably benefits from his time in Boston with their kind of defensive, identity and being around Marcus Smart every day. Aaron was like, hey, I'm gonna have to defend and be tough and rugged and mean and gritty if I want to get on the court for this team. And so he kind of flipped the switch a little bit on what he wanted to be about. And the shooting was still, a big part of his game, but he's morphed into almost like a Marcus Smart type mentality player, which is awesome for us because that's what we need more of. And Obi is a guy that we're hopeful that, a new situation, a new playing style. Obviously, New York has a great team that plays their way. We play different than them, hoping that at least the offensive side, it's a good match. And, the defensive end is something, the rebound and the defense is a weakness for us. And we got to see Obi develop with those two areas too. But hopeful that, this is a great situation for him to thrive.
The only non-internal Pacers question that I have for you, ripple effects obviously are felt after the Damian Lillard trade, him going to Milwaukee. Did you guys have any contact or conversations about Drew Holiday after that?
I mean, every team probably called on Drew Holiday. I mean, he's one of the best, if not the best, two-way guard in the league. And it's just our job to ask, hey, what's the situation? What are you looking for? I think you could ask all 29 teams, and they would give you the same answer I just did. There's a few guys in the league that when they're available, you make the call. It's just part of your.
Was Damian Lillard one of them? Did you inquire?
No, we did not inquire on Damian. I mean, Damian is a guy that, plays Tyrese's position. We didn't think that would probably match as well. We want to empower Tyrese as that be our point guard of our future. Drew is a guy that can play on or off the ball. That's why.
He's a good defender, too.
He's a phenomenal defender.
Did you actually have a yin and yang of emotion because just when you like exhale that Drew Holiday is in the West and then all of a sudden he comes back to the East and to one of the contending teams, I mean, that's an impact, is it not?
Sure. I mean, those two teams, Boston, Milwaukee, are looking much more imposing. Not that they weren't before, but
right.
Now they look clearly head and shoulders above everybody else in the East right now. And part of our growth is not always comparing what other teams are doing. It's focusing on our guys getting better every day and what can we do to make our team stay on this climb. The natural instinct is want to try to put all in right now. And I think that's where you can make a mistake and sacrifice. You look at a team like Denver, and even we talk about Memphis and Cleveland have been very patient in how they've built their teams, and now they're in a position to have a good long runway of a very successful team, and that's where we want to get to.
You are a parent, right?
I am.
You have how many kids?
3.
Okay, so 3 kids. So let's say that you and your wife are going to go on a vacation. You want to go for the weekend, get away, clear your head, and you've got to pick somebody on the roster to watch your kids. Who do you pick?
Oh boy. Watch my kids. I'd probably lean towards somebody that already has a kid so they know what they're getting into.
Right.
I mean, my kids would have a blast with Buddy Hield. I know that.
So that's what I was going to. The other part of the question would be, which guy actually is the one that they would have so much fun because he'd be like making popcorn with them and staying up until 10 o'clock and watching movies and everything else.
It'd be either Buddy or Jarris. Those two guys have such a fun-loving spirit, and they're just happy around everybody. And I think my kids would love those two guys.
How long does it take when you're going through the process? Like you talk about, and we haven't even discussed the draft picks, right? The 2 of them. So let's talk about the rookies that are here. In Jarris' situation, how long does it take for you to truly have an idea who a guy is when you're in the interview process? And is there a player from the past that you learned from because they Eddie Haskell'd you a little bit and you learned from it?
That happens more than you might think, and that's a danger in the draft process when you're getting to know a guy and you hear stuff from the coaches that have coached him or teammates that have played with him, and then you get to meet him and you're like, this is not what I expected. Jarris in particular, I think we had in mind that Jarris was this, mean, nasty, rough,
I mean, he looks like it, right?
Yeah,
He's like a
that's what he
junkyard
looks.
dog,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And then when you get to know him, he's this very thoughtful, caring, social, wants to connect with everybody, good-natured, fun-loving kid who really knows how to play basketball. He's got a phenomenal feel, which when you have a feel, that accelerates how fast you develop. And the guys who maybe don't have a great basketball IQ, it takes them longer if they hit at all. Whereas Jarris just knows how to play. I mean, he's played guys that have played point guard at some point in their life inherently have a little bit different feel for the game, or they tend to.
Well, one thing about him, I know that it's a sour taste in the mouth still for Indiana basketball fans, but if you play for Kelvin Sampson, you're going to have to want to play defense, right?
Absolutely.
How much of that factored in?
I mean, a big factor. I mean, I go back to Bruce, we needed to improve ourselves as a defensive team, and we wanted to take a guy with our pick that had upside, number one, but also we felt had the defensive chops to be, whether it's early in his career or at some point in his career, it could be a guy who can guard the Jason Tatums, the Giannis's, these big ball handling players that we didn't have a guy on our roster that can match up with them. And now Jarris is not ready to do that today, but hopefully in time as he learns the league and develops more experience, can be that for us.
Lastly, Ben Shepherd, I think a lot of people were surprised, quite frankly, when he was drafted. I mean, you had the riches of a second pick in that round. What about him most intrigued you, and is he a slower mold into the roster than, say, what we're going to see from last year from Benedict Mathurin or this year from Jarris?
Yeah, Ben is not the guy who's going to be – he's not the sexy player. But when you watch him, we just watched him today, he's the guy that – you don't want to be matched up against because he goes after every freaking rebound. He dives on the floor for loose balls. He makes quick decisions moving the ball, and he's just this blur of energy. And that's what we thought we were getting in the draft process. And when you're picking the late first round, there's 2 ways to approach it. You can either take the highest upside guy that's probably got a 90% chance of failing, or you can take the guy you're like, I know this guy's good enough to make it. He's too smart to know, who he is as a player to not do that. And, he's going to fit in because he understands. He can look in the mirror and say, I know what I do to survive in this league. And that's what we got from Ben. And so far, that's what we've seen so far. And he's capable of making shots, too. He's a great shooter in college, and he shot it great today. He had a phenomenal practice in college, wasn't he? He was a very good defender. He's the guy, he plays at full effort all the time.
You know what? Everybody plays pickup basketball, right? Everybody listening plays pickup basketball. And you go out there, and there's always some guy that's like dunking during the warm-ups and pickup ball, and you're like, that guy's good. And then when you start playing, it's always like the 40-year-old sweaty guy with hairy shoulders that starts checking you like as soon as and you're like, dude, I'm just trying to get exercise here. Is that who he is?
Is that us now?
Yeah, that's me. That's me, right? Well, I'm 50, so I don't know about 40, but there's always that one guy that his motor just it completely throws you off.
Yes, the best thing I could describe Ben Shepherd is, I've heard this coach say this before. He plays every day like he's trying to make the team. And he's on the team. Obviously, he's a first-round pick, but he approaches every day, every workout, like, I've got to prove myself again today. I've got to prove myself again tomorrow. And that elevates practice for everybody. Because as a veteran, if you want to, hey, I'm going to go 75% today, I can't do it. I got Ben Shepherd run all over the place, going after every rebound and sprinting the lane every time and cutting off every motion we run. So that and alone has value to our team. We've seen it so far from him.
Okay, my last question overall. Last time I saw you, you had a watch on. I commented on it. I'm a watch guy. I think you said that Rick Carlisle had given it to you as a gift. I could be wrong. I think this is a different watch.
Same one.
It is the same one?
Same one, yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, because I was like, man, do you have to wear the watch all the time because Rick Carlisle gave it to you, right?
Ironically, it's a watch that if you don't wear it for a day or two, it stops.
Yeah,
and you got to reset it.
Yeah, you got to wind it, yeah.
I know Rick is always checking to make sure you didn't wear my watch the last couple of days, did you? So I wear it every day.
Well,
now.
It's a nice-looking watch, right?
It is a great watch.
And who knows, Chad, who knows? With the right amount of work, with Rick Carlisle, maybe in a couple of years you can add a ring to the jewelry collection.
That is the ultimate goal. I dream about that every day. I think everybody in our building does.
Well, I think the city would certainly be happy for it, but we look forward to it. Setting Washington, if I'm not mistaken, is the opener, right?
Correct.
You got a couple of weeks before you get to that, and then before you know it, we are underway. So I appreciate the time. I know you're busy. Appreciate the time today, and for teaching me how to shut off my phone when the alarm went off. That was good stuff. Chad, appreciate it. Good luck.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Chad.
Again, seventh year now. The general manager of the Indiana Pacers, Chad Buchanan, joins us. We'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll get back into what's taking place at West 56th as well and recap that conversation here on Query Company, 93.5, 107.5 The Fan.